The smell of old hay mixed with rust and something far more unsettling clung to the air inside the auction barn. A low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the wooden pens that lined the walls like forgotten cages. Sheriff Elijah Montelrio crouched beside one of them, his black uniform brushing against the dusty floor. In his hand, a flashlight cut through the shadows, landing on a frail young foal whose ribs protruded sharply beneath its sunken coat. Its eyes, wide and still, met Elijah's with a strange, unspoken sorrow. Behind him stood 4 men in cowboy hats and dark flannel shirts, shadows cloaking their expressions. Among them, Caleb Veyrón, the oldest, shifted uncomfortably. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest. Joshua Carraldes leaned against the wooden fence, his gaze unreadable. Mateo Laskora, the youngest of the group, wore a thin smirk that Elijah didn't trust. The sheriff didn't need words to feel it. Something was deeply wrong here. Elijah extended a gloved hand slowly toward the foal. It flinched, but didn't retreat. The flashlight beam caught a smear of dried blood on the wooden slats, then something else, tucked in the corner of the pen, a piece of torn fabric with a faded emblem, a golden star. Elijah froze. That symbol. It wasn't just familiar. It matched the one stitched to his own badge. His breath caught in his throat. "Where did this foal come from?" he asked without turning. No one answered. He looked back down at the animal. There was a quiet intelligence in its eyes, like it understood more than it should. Elijah felt a pull, not just pity, but a strange connection, like this wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning. The foal took one step closer. Elijah rested his hand gently on its muzzle. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he whispered. "What's your story, soul?" From the corner of the barn, Hannah Kivara, Elijah's deputy, stepped in with a concerned expression. "We found more in the back," she said. "Another dozen pens. Empty, but fresh straw. They've been using this place, Elijah. Recently." He stood slowly, his gaze locked on the foal, on Soul, and then turned to the men behind him. "This auction's over," Elijah said, voice low and steady. "And none of you are leaving." But deep down, he knew this wasn't just a crime scene. This was the beginning of something much deeper. Something that would drag his past, and everyone in it, back into the light. Sheriff Elijah Montelrio didn't speak as he walked out of the barn, the cold night air hitting his face like a slap. In his gloved hand, he still held the scrap of fabric, the golden star now smeared with dried blood. It wasn't a coincidence. He could feel it in his gut. The emblem wasn't just some decorative mark. It meant something. Something personal. Something buried. Behind him, Deputy Hannah Kivara walked in silence, reading his tension in every step. "What do you think it means?" she asked quietly. Elijah didn't respond right away. He kept walking toward the patrol truck parked under the shadow of an old oak tree. The silence between them grew heavier. "It's from an old uniform," he finally said. "Not ours. This stitching, it's older. Pre-2000s. His voice faltered for a second. "My father wore one like it." Back inside the barn, Soul shifted quietly in the pen, now draped with a thin blanket Hannah had thrown over him earlier. Caleb Veyrón and the others stood further back, guarded by a pair of deputies. They weren't speaking, but their body language betrayed unease. Joshua Carraldes kept glancing toward the far end of the barn, where a narrow hallway led to a second wing, one Elijah hadn't had time to check yet. Elijah turned to Hannah. "Stay with the horse. Don't let anyone near him." She nodded without hesitation. There was something in her eyes, a glimmer of worry. She could see Elijah wasn't just investigating a case. He was chasing a ghost. One that looked a lot like his own reflection. As she returned to the barn, Elijah walked back inside, alone, his flashlight in hand. At the end of the narrow hallway, the smell worsened, Not just animals, but oil, sweat, and something metallic. Elijah pushed open a crooked wooden door and found a room with metal cabinets and faded paper files stacked high on a desk. On the wall, yellowed photos of livestock, auction tags, and shipping manifests. One caught his eye, a photo of a foal. Not sole, but nearly identical. The tag read, "Property of D. Corvianez." The name hit him like a punch. Daniela Corvianez. A name he hadn't heard in 20 years. A name he had tried to forget. His hands began to tremble slightly as he reached for the photo. In the stillness of that back room, Elijah realized the truth. Soul wasn't just a rescue. He was a link to a past Elijah had run from, and to a woman he'd once loved and lost under suspicious circumstances that had never truly been explained. The photo trembled slightly in Elijah's hand. It was grainy, time-worn, but unmistakable. The foal's features, the marking on its left flank, the curved scar near its shoulder, all mirrored what he had seen on Soul. But it wasn't just the foal that caught his breath. Scrawled on the back of the photo, in elegant script, was a single name, Daniela C. 2005. His fingers instinctively tightened. The year was like a dagger to his memory. Daniela Corvianez had once been everything to Elijah. Before the badge, before the uniform, before the walls he'd built around himself, there had been summers on the Corvianez ranch, long rides beneath bleeding Texas sunsets, and dreams whispered beneath willow trees. But something had changed between them. Something had broken. And then she had disappeared, suddenly, without explanation, leaving behind questions Elijah had never dared to ask again. He sat down heavily in the rickety chair by the desk, the photo still in his grip. "Why now?" he murmured to himself. "Why here?" Had Soul somehow come from Daniela's bloodline? Or worse, was Daniela herself involved in this illegal auction ring? The idea twisted in his gut. The girl he remembered had been fierce, kind, and loved animals more than people. But 20 years was a long time. People changed, sometimes in ways you never saw coming. Back in the barn, Hannah watched Soul from outside the pen. The foal had laid down, curling its legs awkwardly beneath its fragile body. Its breathing was shallow, but steady. She noticed something tied to the rope around his neck, a faded leather tag, nearly falling apart. She stepped inside, gently undid the knot, and retrieved it. Scratched into the leather, almost too faint to read, "Soul, hope will return." Hannah's brow furrowed. "Hope will return?" she whispered. It sounded more like a message than a name. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of it, then stepped outside to find Elijah. He was already coming down the hallway, holding the photograph. Their eyes met, and something passed silently between them. Elijah didn't speak right away, but when he reached her, he simply showed her the image. Hannah's lips parted. "That's him," she said. "It's Soul, but from years ago." "No," Elijah said quietly. "It's his mother." The pieces were falling into place, not clearly, not yet, but they were leading somewhere undeniable. Someone had bred Soul with intention. And the trail was pulling Elijah back to a life he had buried long ago, and to a woman whose name still haunted his sleep. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. Back at the station, he sat alone in his dimly lit office, the photo of Soul's mother lying flat on the desk, right beside the tattered emblem he'd found in the barn. Every sound around him, the hum of the overhead fan, the ticking of the old wall clock, seemed louder than usual, like time itself was reminding him that the past had caught up. He stared at the photo, his mind drifting back to the summer of 2005. That was the year Daniela Corvianez vanished. They were both 22 then. She had come to his graduation in her dusty old pickup, wearing boots and that faded green bandana she always used when working with the horses. They'd argued that day, about her father, about the land, about something Elijah had overheard and never fully understood. 2 weeks later, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just rumors. Some said she ran off with someone from out of town. Others claimed her family sent her away to hide a scandal. Elijah never knew what to believe, and eventually he stopped trying. Until now. The next morning, he drove to a remote part of town, to a woman who might know more than she ever let on. Marisol Tenoya, Daniela's childhood friend and once the closest thing she had to a sister. Elijah hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, and as he pulled up to her small ranch-style house, he felt the weight of every year between them. Marisol opened the door slowly, her face hardening when she saw who it was. "Elijah Montelrio," she said flatly. "Thought you disappeared along with her." "I need answers," he replied. "About Daniela. About the horses. About Soul." Her eyes narrowed at the name. "You found him?" "I think I found her son," he said. Marisol stepped back, letting him in without another word. The inside of her house smelled like cinnamon and old leather. Photographs lined the walls, none of them recent. She led him to a wooden trunk in the corner of the room. From it, she pulled a bundle of weathered letters, tied with a red ribbon. She handed them to Elijah. She wrote these. From Mexico. From somewhere she called La Durina. Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he untied the ribbon. The first letter began with 3 words that hit him harder than a bullet. "I had to disappear." As he read, the silence in the room thickened. Daniela hadn't run. She had hidden. And whatever had driven her away, it wasn't over. The letters were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but Daniela's voice came through clear, as if no time had passed. Elijah sat in Marisol's living room, the bundle resting on his lap like sacred scripture. Each page peeled back years of silence. The 5th letter, dated February 2006, struck a nerve. In it, Daniela wrote of a place in northern Mexico called La Durina, a hidden ranch far from towns or roads, where horses were bred not for love, but for profit. And worse, some were never meant to be seen by the public. "There are things happening here, Elijah," the letter read. "Things that made me run, and things I'm not sure I'll survive." Elijah closed his eyes, holding the paper to his chest. Soul wasn't just a foal that ended up in a dirty Texas barn. He was a product of a system Daniela had tried to escape. It suddenly made sense. Her disappearance, the silence, even the emblem with the golden star. She had been part of something darker. Maybe not by choice. Maybe by blood. Marisol watched him from across the room, arms folded. "She sent those letters to me over 5 years, she said. Then one day they stopped. No warning. Just silence. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Elijah asked. "Who would have believed me? She was already gone. Her father sold the land, moved to Guatemala. Everyone just moved on." Elijah stood up, pacing. "This La Durina. Do you know where it is?" She nodded slowly. "Only a name and a map she sketched once. Said if anything happened to her, someone should find it. I kept it. It's in my attic." She disappeared down the hall, leaving Elijah alone with the letters. He flipped through one more, dated late 2009. It was short. Just a sentence. "If anything happens, look for Soul. He will know." That sentence echoed in Elijah's chest like a whisper from another world. Soul wasn't just the key to the mystery. He was the last thread of Daniela's voice. A symbol. A clue. Maybe even a living message left behind by someone who knew her time was running out. When Marisol returned with the folded map, Elijah felt the weight of it before he even opened it. Whatever lay beyond that border, in the shadowed hills of northern Mexico, wasn't just about horses or auctions or crime. It was about the truth. One he might not be ready to face. Crossing into northern Mexico wasn't part of Elijah Montelrio's job description. But he had stopped thinking like a sheriff 3 days ago. This wasn't about law enforcement anymore. It was personal. With Soul now safe at a veterinary clinic under the care of Dr. Isabella Durino, a trusted friend of Hannah's, Elijah took only what he needed: Daniela's letters, the faded map from Marisol's attic, and a gun he hoped he wouldn't have to use. The road to La Durina was unmarked, dusty, narrow, swallowed by desert. The further he drove, the more it felt like time peeled backward. There were no towns, no signs, just mountains in the distance and silence pressing in on every side. The map led him past an abandoned church and an old mill, until finally, at the edge of a sun-scorched canyon, he saw it, a broken wooden gate with the letters LD burned into the post. The ranch was still there, but barely. Elijah stepped out of the truck, boots sinking slightly into dry, cracked earth. The buildings were sun-bleached and worn, a main house with shuttered windows, a stable with half its roof collapsed, and a watchtower that looked like it hadn't been manned in a decade. But there were signs of life: recent tire tracks, boot prints, even the faint smell of burned wood. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. Inside the stables, he found what he feared and expected: chains, old medical crates, broken saddles, and a large branding iron still stained with soot. The initials CV were stamped into the wall above the stalls. Carraldes Veyrón, the same Caleb Veyrón who'd stood silently in that Texas barn. Elijah felt a wave of nausea rise. It wasn't just coincidence. They had been part of this from the beginning. A noise behind him made him spin, fast, hand on his gun. But it wasn't a threat. A figure stepped from the shadows, hands raised. A woman, older now, with eyes just as fierce as he remembered. "Elijah," she said, voice cracked from the dry air. "You shouldn't have come." His throat dried instantly. "Daniela." She didn't move closer, didn't smile. Her body carried years of running, hiding, surviving. "They'll come back soon," she whispered. "And if they find you here, they won't let you leave." But Elijah wasn't leaving. Not without answers. And not without her. Elijah couldn't speak at first. Seeing Daniela Corvianez standing in front of him, weathered by time, eyes heavier than he remembered, shattered the image he'd carried for years. She looked older, yes, but not weak. There was a kind of hardened grace in the way she stood. A survivor. But she wasn't smiling. She wasn't relieved. She was afraid. "I thought you were dead," Elijah finally said, his voice low. "I had to be," she replied, eyes scanning the ranch around them. "For me. For him." Elijah's breath caught. "For who?" Daniela hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "Soul is your son, Elijah." The words landed like a thunderclap in his chest. He staggered back a step, blinking. He'd thought of Soul as a symbol, a message, but not this. Not flesh. Not blood. The idea spiraled through him, breaking every assumption he'd made. "You never told me." "I couldn't," Daniela said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what this place became. What your badge couldn't protect us from. After I found out I was pregnant, I tried to leave. But Caleb, Carraldes, they made it clear. I was breeding something valuable. Soul was never meant to be free. He was property." She led Elijah inside the old main house, where dust hung in the air like memory. There, she showed him documents, genetic charts, veterinary records, transport orders. Soul's name was on all of them. They wanted to sell him to a private collector in Dubai, she said. He was the last of a rare bloodline, one they created. And when I threatened to expose them, they took him from me. Elijah's fists clenched. All those years thinking he'd been abandoned, when in truth, she had been fighting for both of them. He looked down at a photo on the table. Daniela holding a newborn foal, her face younger, eyes still full of hope. It was Soul. They moved him across the border last month, she said. I thought I'd lost him forever, until Marisol sent word someone found him. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swirled along the path near the gate. Daniela moved to the window and froze. "They're here," she whispered. "Caleb, Mateo, Joshua. They found us." Elijah turned, eyes sharpening. "Then we stand our ground." Daniela didn't argue. She just placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Promise me one thing," she said. "No matter what happens, get Soul out." The rumble of tires crunching over gravel grew louder with each passing second. Elijah looked through the broken window frame and saw the dust cloud first, then the truck. Caleb Veyrón drove, his face stoic as ever. Beside him sat Mateo Laskora, and in the back, Joshua Carraldes, rifle resting casually across his knees. They weren't here to talk. They were here to clean up. Daniela locked the front door with shaking hands, though both knew it wouldn't hold. Elijah moved quickly through the house, checking windows, corners, anything they could use. He found an old double-barrel shotgun hanging behind the kitchen door. It hadn't been fired in years, but it would have to do. "Take the back," he told Daniela. "If anything happens, you get to the stable. Get Soul's papers and go." "He's in Texas," she whispered. "He's safe now." "For now," Elijah said. "But if they kill us, they'll come for him. They always finish what they start." Outside, the truck came to a stop. Doors opened. Footsteps crunched toward the house. Elijah stood by the front window, heart pounding like it did the first time he ever pulled his weapon. But this was different. This wasn't duty. This was family. "Daniela!" Caleb's voice boomed from the front porch. "We don't want blood. Just give us the map. The files. We walk away." "You never walked away from anything," Elijah muttered, leveling the shotgun. He flung the door open and stepped out. "It's over, Caleb." Mateo raised his weapon, but Caleb threw out a hand, stopping him. "I thought you were smarter than this, Montelrio. I thought you were human," Elijah shot back. "But you turned a ranch into a prison. You turned a child into property." Caleb's expression hardened. "That child was worth more than both of you combined." A gunshot cracked the silence, not from Elijah, from inside the house. The men ducked, scattering. Elijah spun, racing back into the house. Daniela stood in the hallway, holding a revolver with both hands. One of the windows had shattered. Blood trailed along the floor. Joshua was gone. Mateo shouted from outside. Caleb cursed. Elijah grabbed Daniela. "There's no more running," he said. "No," she agreed, her voice like steel. "There's only the truth." And outside, storm clouds gathered over the desert as if the sky itself knew. This wasn't just the end of a chase, it was the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. The wind howled against the broken shutters of the old ranch house, carrying with Eli a storm that refused to wait. Inside, Elijah and Daniela moved with silent urgency, gathering every document, every photo, every scrap of evidence about La Durina and what had been done there. The gunfire had stopped outside, but not because it was over. It was the silence of regrouping. Elijah looked down at the blood trail Joshua had left behind. It disappeared near the corral, where darkness now swallowed everything. He wasn't sure if Joshua was alive or bleeding out in the dirt, but he couldn't afford to care. Not now. Caleb and Mateo were still out there, still hunting. And the deeper truth haunted him more than their weapons. Soul wasn't just a victim. He was a reason, a legacy, a lifeline. "He's the only good thing I have left," Daniela whispered, holding a torn photo of her younger self, cradling Soul as a newborn. "I stayed hidden to protect him. I kept quiet for too long. But I won't anymore." Elijah took the photo and slid it into his coat pocket. Then we end this. Here. Tonight. A sound cracked in the back, wood splitting. They both turned. Mateo kicked down the side door, rifle raised. His eyes were wide with rage, but there was fear in them too. You don't get it, do you? He barked. This wasn't about you. It was about what he was bred to be. Elijah raised his shotgun. He was bred to be free. Mateo pulled the trigger. Too late. Elijah fired first. The blast shook the hallway. Mateo dropped instantly. Silence followed. Not relief. Not victory. Just silence. Daniela leaned against the wall, hands shaking, eyes full of tears that wouldn't fall. How many more? She asked. Just one, Elijah said. Caleb. But Caleb wasn't a man who died in a shootout. He was the kind who vanished into smoke or burned everything behind him. And when Elijah stepped outside, he saw the barn in flames. A fire had been set near the rear, where the remaining records were stored. Caleb's truck was gone. He'd left them a parting message. No proof, no history, no name. Daniela stood beside Elijah as the flames climbed higher. We still have the letters, she said. And we have the truth. Elijah nodded slowly. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about soul, and what kind of future they could give him now that the past had come roaring back to life. 3 weeks had passed since the fire at La Durina. The desert had gone quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence. It was the kind that follows a storm, uneasy, reflective. Elijah stood at the edge of the Corvianés land, now cleared of danger but haunted by everything that had happened there. The sky stretched wide above him, the Texas horizon glowing gold with late afternoon light. And beside him, grazing peacefully in the tall grass, was Soul. He looked healthier now. Stronger. The wounds had healed, and the weight had returned to his frame. But it was his eyes that carried the biggest change, no longer filled with fear, but with recognition. He knew Elijah. And Elijah, for the first time, truly understood what it meant to protect something not just with your badge, but with your heart. Daniela stepped onto the porch behind him, a cup of coffee in her hands. Her eyes were tired but clearer. The years had stolen many things from her. Peace, freedom, time, but not her will to fight. Not her love for the son she had kept hidden for so long. The journalist from El Paso called again, she said softly. She wants to run the story. All of it. And you? Elijah asked, not turning. You ready for the world to know what they did? Daniela took a long breath. I'm not hiding anymore. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, authorities recovered part of the burned files. Hannah and Dr. Isabella Durino helped build the case. Marisol gave her testimony. And Elijah, for the first time, stood not just as a sheriff, but as a father, telling the truth no one had been brave enough to speak. They didn't find Caleb. Not yet. But they would. The law had a way of catching up, even with ghosts like him. Now, standing in the quiet of the late day, Elijah reached out and placed a hand gently on Soul's neck. The horse leaned into his touch, calm and warm. He's home, Daniela whispered. Elijah nodded. And we are too. Hope, like Soul's name, wasn't just something you waited for. It was something you fought for, even when the road was broken, even when the past tried to bury you. In the dust of all that was lost, something new had taken root. Something worth living for.